Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Today I finished another daily game with my mate who's just starting out in chess. I really like how my friend is trying out a different opening each time, as it makes for some interesting and dynamic games. As he is a more intuitive player, these games often have some useful tips for chess players earlier on in their journey. Please enjoy! So a very quick review. So not surprising, given I am sort of rated quite a bit higher than my friend. I played with sort of higher accuracy, but definitely not perfect, 83%. We both had some good moves and also some inaccuracies, and we shared a blunder as well. Let's have a quick look now at the analysis. So in this game, I played with the black pieces and my mate played with white. He led, interesting enough, with knight f3. I developed my opposite knight, knight c6, knight c3, and here I play e5. So that square is now defended by my knight, so there is no reason not to play a pawn to try to control the center. Opponent plays e4, I play my other knight. So basically, even though it started a little bit unusually, it has sort of transposed into the four knights game. He now plays bishop e2, which is okay, but does forfeit a little bit of an advantage to me. And this is a relatively passive move, I suppose. So it might have made more sense to move bishop to c4, or maybe to b5. So that would be sort of the four knights Italian. To this square, it would be the four knights Spanish. This is often a position you can end up in the Ruy Lopez. According to Stockfish, this is a good move as well. So almost a little bit like a waiting move, a3, but it does prevent both the bishop and knight, and the bishop from going to the b4 square. Here I develop my bishop to c5, and interesting, no, I'm not someone who plays the four knights very often, so that wasn't the best move, gives advantage to white. And here I could have instead played d5. So even though it's defended, I can potentially capture back with the knight, and that knight is now attacking that knight. That knight cannot capture back because the queen will then capture back. And often, if you can take the full center with 2 pawns, it's often good to do so. Here I decided to sort of play a more sort of Italian-ish type setup. So I played bishop c5. And a learning point for me is that that's actually not as good as just taking the full center with a pawn. Now, my opponent makes, I think, probably his first big mistake, which is knight d5. And why is it a mistake? Well, it's an aggressive push, ostensibly trying to attack my knight. However, that knight is defended, so really it's not a particularly scary move. That knight was also initially protecting the pawn on e4. Now that it's undefended, I can easily capture that pawn, and there's no reason why I wouldn't capture that pawn. And there we go, so minus 1.7 to my advantage. And now that knight it's kind of awkwardly placed because it can't really go here, 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 or here, or really even there. So it really doesn't have any good place for it to go. One of the ideas, if you sort of remember from previous videos, is when there's a diagonal attacking piece 2 squares away from the knight, so here it's my queen, often that limits the mobility of knights. So a big push from the pawn, so d4, ostensibly attacking both pieces. However, again, that's not really scary because there is basically, apart from that pawn, there's two other attackers. And here I've got 1, 2, 3. Defenders. So I can straight up capture that pawn, cannot capture back. Well, could, but then I could capture back and queen can't make the first capture. So I end up being materially ahead with that sequence. So that was definitely a straight out blunder of that pawn. Short castles. Here I move my pawn forward, so d6, and my idea here is I wanted to open up the diagonal for my bishop. My mate plays bishop b5, I suppose with an attack on that knight, also pinning it to my king. So, you know, ostensibly a good idea. So here I decided to unpin with my bishop, and this was apparently a blunder. Now, I didn't see this in the game, but the risk here is that that knight is in some trouble because basically I would end up but they will pin my knight to my king. A better move here to take the king out of the pin was simply to have short castled. However, I thought this was basically okay, but the Soffish disagrees. The opponent plays queen e2. So again, you know, with an attack on that knight. Now here I played f5 as an extra defender, and nothing here can particularly attack that pawn. So I'm feeling pretty happy here. And my thoughts here, given that I've potentially moved some of these pawns out of the way, was that I was going to perhaps long castles at some point and then do a big pawn push into the face, basically, of the opponent king. Now, this was probably an error, this capture, given this is a straight out trade of pieces, and there was no particular reason I think my opponent really needed to have given up their bishop pair. And particularly now, these bishops are looking in the right direction against the opponent king, which have now short castled. Opponent plays bishop g5. It's reasonable, I suppose. However, probably not also the best move, because I could simply just move the queen out of the way. You know, the idea is that, yes, the knight is pinned to the king, but I can just move the queen out of the way without any particular problems. I want to do that anyway, because I now have the opportunity to long castles once I get that bishop out of the way. Opponent now plays knight f4, I suppose recognizing that that knight was poorly placed. However, this now leads to an opportunity. I'd already decided that I was going to long castles, which means I'm ready to push these pawns. And this bishop is somewhat trapped in this cluster here. So firstly, h6 with an attack on the bishop. Bishop cannot go here, cannot go here, cannot go here, you know. So must go back really to h4. And now with these two pieces, there's the opportunity of forking those two pieces with the pawn, g5, and now they must give up one of these pieces. So chose to give up the bishop. I'm not sure that was the best idea. Now I've got an attack on that knight, so that knight now must retreat a second time. I'm not concerned about that. It is defended, and potentially that allows me to undouble my pawns. This pawn was hanging. That might have in fact been the better move for the opponent. So I now long castles, get the king out of the way. This knight is also now unpinned. So the opponent now wants to push through their pawns on what is their queen side, so where my king is now. And this is potentially a good idea. However, they're just not fast enough. They're just not fast enough. They're trying to push these pawns. So I think the idea here potentially is, you know, if they were able to play b5, this bishop is trapped. However, they're just simply not fast enough, because now I've got g4 attacking that knight. Now that knight further, also now that we have opposite side castled, is the only defender at the moment other than the king for the pawn on h2. And that is potentially very, very risky for the opponent. So there are some serious potential mate threats along there. And so if I can kick out that knight, that's pretty much the final defender. So they move the knight out, and here I bring the queen across. That is the best move, but as you can see, even though it's the best move, a checkmate is inevitable. And this is partly because I now have so many attackers on the side of their king. So 1, 2, probably 3, 4, 5, you know, and there really isn't enough defense. So the easiest thing to do is just straight out capture, push the pawn forward, which is potentially fine. However, now it's with check. So now the opponent has really only one of two moves. So if the opponent played king h1, then there's this potential absolutely devastating and gangster move, either knight f2 or knight g3, capturing either of those two pawns, where it is checkmate with double check or double checkmate. I did see that. I hope that my mate would play that move. However, he didn't play that move, which I suppose is fine. So the move that actually occurred in the game is king g2. Now that allows for pawn to promote to queen, forced move, rook must capture, and then queen captures, and now checkmate. So a good game with my mate, GG. One of the first tips from this game for beginner players looking to improve is that it might be worthwhile focusing on one or two initial openings first. The Italian is often good, as is the Four Knights game. I think this does depend on what you hope to get out of chess. And if it's just for fun, then wild chaotic games with other players rated below 1000 are often super fun. However, for more concerted improvement, choosing one opening and improving that often makes sense, especially if you don't actually spend much time on chess. In the opening, if there is an opportunity to safely place the king's and queen's pawn in the center of the board, this is typically good. Remember that the positions in chess are dynamic. When you move a piece, you need to consider whether something that was defended is now undefended, and whether something that was blocked is now unblocked. When attacking a piece or a position, in the absence of something else that is forcing, like a check, pin, or skewer, generally you need one more attacker than defender, or else you may end up losing material. Generally, it's good to keep the bishop pair, and this is typically advantageous over knights, as bishops are a long-range attacking piece. They tend to coordinate well with each other, meaning, unless there is a good reason, aggressively trading a bishop for a knight in the early game is often not good. When you and your opponent have castled on opposite sides, storming the opponent's king with a pawn push is often a good strategy. Simultaneously, remember that the defense of your king is the single most important priority unless you're at the point of forcing a checkmate on the opponent. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.